Farm manager at Food, Water, Shelter. We heard from Robert in the earlier session. He's going to give us a presentation on integrated pest management for the low input vegetable production. So Don, you ready?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to run through some of these ideas fairly rapidly, so I'm taking a digital video of my talk, and I'll be putting it up on my website here, donlauder.net. So if you miss anything and you really want to get something, you should be able to link to it from my website. It'll be up on Google Video. Or you can email me at don@donlauder.net. Currently, I'm on a short-term assignment with Mennonite Central Committee in Dodoma, working on erosion control around the sand dam project that they have. And then I'll most likely be working with Global Service Corps later in the year. Okay, I'm going to talk briefly about 3 different areas of IPM, integrated pest management. First, soil biology and plant immunity to pests and disease. And I put immunity in quotes because plant scientists don't really use that term, but it really does fit quite well. Then secondly, I'll be talking about an agroecological approach to managing pests. And then lastly, locally sourced natural pesticide sprays, especially neem, the neem tree. Next, please. Okay, I'm from California, where we have a big agriculture industry, the 4th largest agriculture in the world. If California was a country, it would be the 8th largest economy in the world. And as you can see, we produce vegetable crops on a large scale. And they've really developed things. They package now into the same boxes that go into the stores within seconds of harvesting. Next slide. Strawberries the same. They package right out in the field. And then, next. These products go to very large cooling facilities, 5 very sophisticated ways, different ways of cooling the different products. Next slide, please. But along with this industrial scale agriculture, paralleling this in a small way, has grown the organic farming movement. And I did both my undergraduate degree and my PhD at the University of California, Davis, which is the university that really well, back when I was an undergraduate in the 70s, served the big agribusiness. Now more and more they're doing more to serve organic farmers. Next slide, please. Organic farming, I think, serves more than to just satisfy demand of consumers who wish to buy food that is grown in a more natural way without synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. I think organic farming, and this is not much talked about, but it brings to the table a diversity, it adds to the diversity of agricultural strategies in a region or a country, and I think this is especially important to think about for Africa. Next slide, please. Here's a small organic farm that has mobile chicken. Corky talked about chicken tractors. Well, here's a fairly large-scale organic farm that moves the chickens along, and then they'll grow vegetables in these areas. Next slide. So I think this idea that adding to the diversity of agricultural strategies is important for this area. Next slide. Now, with organic farming, things start with the soil, and this was talked about yesterday. Stan Dorr talked about the brown revolution. I think that's a great term. Next slide, please. The living soil community is especially focused on in organic farming. In fact, I remember one of the early books that we had in the 70s. It was called The Living Soil by Sir Alwyn Howard from Britain. And so it's always been a really important concept, and I'm gonna show how science has really shown that to be true in just a minute. Next slide. Cover crops have been really focused on by organic farmers for 40 or 50 years now, and I think organic farmers have really done probably the most work on bringing cover crops into agriculture, and then this concept has spread to conventional non-organic agriculture. Next slide, please. We talked about the lab bean, or Roland Bunch talked about it yesterday. This is a good one for here, planted with grasses. In North America, we often plant legumes and grasses in a mix. Next slide. And then composts are important, and it has been shown that composts, well-made composts, when applied, when you're laying down a cover crop, when composts are applied, there's a synergistic effect on the soils to release nutrients and get good crop growth. Now, I'd like to tell us a little story about, that is one of the really great lessons in my life. When I was an undergraduate at University of California, Davis, the big, back in the mid-70s, again, it was really, the university ag program really served the big agriculture, and for pest management, pesticides were just about the only thing that they used. Well, I was a part of a group of students, about 30 or 40 students, almost all undergraduates, who were interested in organic farming and what we call alternative agriculture, which is sort of early sustainable agriculture movement. And we were swimming against the current, going against the grain, and sometimes sort of looked down upon. But we used to have organic farmers come in and talk to us. And I remember every one of those organic farmers telling us, my crops have some kind of vitality that allows them to resist pests and disease. And this concept was not only dismissed by the faculty and the mainstream agriculturists, but ridiculed. Okay, it was called black magic or voodoo agriculture, and we still sort of joke about this term, voodoo agriculture. Well, 25 years later, fast forward, I'm a graduate student in the late 90s at the same institution, University of California, Davis, in the Department of Entomology, doing an agroecology PhD. And I was sharing a lab with a group that was doing research on this, what's called systemic, next slide, systemic acquired resistance of plants. It's a type of plant immunity, and I use the term immunity because it occurs, systemic acquired resistance, or SAR, kicks in a plant when plants are attacked by low levels or moderate levels of disease or pests. And the other thing that they've shown in research a number of times is that when composts are applied to plants, systemic acquired resistance kicks in, okay? And the third thing that research has shown is that when systemic acquired resistance, this is plant immunity, when fungicides are applied, the plant turns off the SAR. So here is the scientific basis for what these farmers were telling us, these small farmers struggling to start the organic farming movement. You know, they had rented land, there wasn't much of a market, they were putting together farmers markets, and these guys are vindicated, you know, and I think it's just such a great story and a lesson to always keep an open mind. And so I may be skeptical about some things that people tell me they're doing or what they believe in, but I rarely dismiss or criticize. And so I just think that's a great lesson. So systemic acquired resistance, I think, is, next slide please. It's enormously complex subject. I'm not going to go through this slide, it's just from my dissertation research. There are different pathways involved salicylic. Okay, next slide. It turns out if you've heard about red wines having resveratrol, which is a compound that reduces heart disease. It's an antioxidant. You may have heard about it. Resveratrol is a plant defense compound from this systemic acquired resistance pathway. All right, the plant doesn't produce it just for us to have be good for our hearts. It's defending itself against fungal attack. These slides are from my research. I did research on vineyards. I compared organic vineyards and conventional vineyards that were infested with the grape phylloxera, quite a famous pest of grape, and found that the organically managed vineyards had this resistance to the roots looked more like this, and in the conventional vineyards, with all the factors the same, there was a lot more root damage and root rot. And so this was, my research got involved in this issue, and I showed that there was what is known as a highly significant difference between the roots of the organically managed vines versus roots from conventionally managed vineyards as far as resistance to the damage that's done. It's actually done by fungal pathogens that enter after the insect does damage to the root. Next slide, please. And so this, the soil and compost, next slide, really, and cover crops are part of this, getting carbon into the soil that supports all that soil life. The micro community, that is the carbon energy. That's the energy of the sun. It goes into the soil, and then an entire food web lives off of that. And that's what the plant roots evolved with, and that's what they like as far as being able to defend themselves against pests and disease. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, it's not much talked about in IPM manuals and trainings, but I think building a healthy soil to get a healthy plant, I've shown you, I have several papers on my, if you go to my website, all of the papers that I've written and published are full text there, and you can find several of them. One of them is in the Organic Wine Journal about, that especially talks about systemic acquired resistance, and you can get more information there. But there's a scientific basis then for this idea that healthy soils build healthy plants that resist pests and disease. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next concept that I would just want to briefly go through is an agroecological approach to pest management, promoting natural enemy insects. Next slide. Now, again, I go back to California, where a lot of research has been done, scientific research on organic systems. This is again a field of lettuce, but this is an organic field of lettuce managed by, run by by the biggest organic produce company in North America, Mission Organics. And right there in the middle, you see flowers planted every 20th row in this lettuce field. Now, why are they taking lettuce out, land out of production for flowers? Well, it turns out that this is important in pest management. And one of my former colleagues, who was in the entomology department at UC Davis, he went to work for Mission Organics, and he showed that it's worthwhile to plant these flowers. You can see another one there, another row. This is Sweet Alyssum. Next slide. Sweet Alyssum is available here. I've found it on the nurseries along the road that goes from Impala Roundabout up to Phillips. You can find it. These flowers are a nectar source for the adult stage of natural enemies. Next slide, please. This is a syrphid fly, and the syrphid fly adults feed on the nectar of these flowers, and then when they fatten up and the females have, develop eggs, they fly out to any plant that has aphids or whiteflies or meals, in other words, food for their larvae. They lay an egg on the leaf, and they chemosense. They can smell the leaves that already have eggs, and so they go to another leaf that doesn't have an egg. And so in this way, most of the foliage in a field within 15 meters, say, of these flowers get an egg laid, and when the egg hatches, the larva emerges, and they are voracious consumers. They just eat aphids and other things that are pests. And so this is what they're doing in those lettuce fields, and that's what we can do on farms here in Africa as well. These natural enemies exist. Next slide. This is a parasitic wasp, also known as parasitoids, because what they do is they actually lay the egg into the insect. And then when the egg emerges, it kills the pest. And these are especially good for controlling what we call worms, the larval stage of lepidopterans, like the diamondback moth and the tomato worms, the little wadudu that get inside your tomatoes and your squashes. And so this is another type of natural enemy. They also, the adult stage feeds on the nectar of flowers. Next slide. And so I've shown the workers at Food Water Shelter how to find these eggs on the foliage. We sit down and we look near flowers, and we can see these syrphid flies and parasitic wasps coming, and then they'll fly out, and you can actually watch them oviposit and lay an egg on a leaf, and then you can, with a hand lens, you can find the eggs, and actually they monitor fields in the Mission Organics program. They'll monitor and make sure that there's enough these eggs laid. Here's a larva of a syrphid fly here. Next slide. So I think this is something that we can teach to farmers here. And I know that Peter Maraghi, in his talk in the afternoon, right, Peter? Is it Peter? Where's Peter? Yes, talks about this, about the use of natural enemies and flowers. And so you might, if you're interested in this, you can go to his talk. Okay, so that is concept number 2, is the promoting natural enemies in fields, and it can be done in both medium and large scale farms, as you saw in California. So it's small, medium, large. The concept is the same. But the use of pesticides, I think farmers need to be trained that pesticides do kill the beneficials, and that they want to minimize as much as they can the application of pesticides. So that's my next, the next subject. Next slide, please. Oh, and the umbelliferous flowers are very good for these as a nectar source. But I've seen many local native plants growing around in and around farms here that are good. Just the smaller flowers are really quite good. And you'll see, if you go out in the morning, you'll see these syrphid flies and parasitic wasps visiting these flowers. So it's quite easy to do. Next slide. Okay, then the third thing I wanted to talk about are locally sourced pesticides. Next slide. Well, I apologize for throwing up a big, a table of numbers, but here, I found this in a journal from India. This is research that was done there. It's not the most rigorous research in the world, but I think it, when you put it with other reports, anecdotal reports, I do want to talk a little bit about what I call hippy-trippy methods that I've, as a scientist, a crop scientist, agricultural scientist, we've always, I think other colleagues of mine have been more critical of what they call hippy-trippy things, and I've always heard about this chili and garlic being used, and gardeners and small farmers really swear by it, but I've always been a little bit skeptical. When I took over the farm manager position at Food Water Shelter, my predecessor, Eve Archibald, who had done just a fantastic job at building the farm there, she had taught the use of chili and garlic in the aqueous solution. And so our farm manager, John, still uses that. Well, here's some evidence that it may really work. In this research, it was not significant. This is endosulfan, which is used, it's one of the reasons why I use this, because endosulfan is banned in Europe and North America for most uses. It's still used a lot here. It's one of the most common insecticides used. There was no significant difference in fruit damage between the Chilean garlic and the endosulfan treatment. And so I thought, well, this is a kerosene extract, which I actually we haven't done. But I think it's an indication that this could be looked into more. And then the other one that I want to talk a little more about is neem, use of neem. And in this case, it's neem and cow urine. Now, I've seen reports from West Africa that show that, you can go to the next slide. Okay, this is research from AVRDC. Next slide. AVRDC is right outside of Arusha, near Tengeru. And they showed that neem was actually more effective than this. This is another one of the insecticides that they use. They've been using it on tomatoes. And in fact, I was out in the field in Dodoma just a week ago, and I saw a bottle of profenifos there, and they were using it. And neem was actually shown by AVRDC, which is an international center. They do pretty good research. Was more effective in controlling the diamondback moth in cabbage than was profenifos. Now back to the idea of neem and cow urine. I've seen reports from West Africa that cotton farmers are using this combination. Now, I know maybe afterwards Roland or somebody who knows more about this can comment on it, but cotton, anybody who's familiar with agriculture knows that cotton is probably the most pest-susceptible large-scale crop. In California, with 300 different crops, cotton's in the top 10, but it accounted for 50% of all pesticide applications. And so cotton is really gets hit by pests. And if these cotton farmers are liking a combination of neem and cow urine, I would like to try it. Well, I looked all over Arusha for neem seed, and I just couldn't find any. I mean, there was some for 30,000 per kilo, and that was just too. I wasn't going to. Didn't have the budget to spend that kind of money. Looked in the marketplace, in the Sokoni, and I called to Moshi. And so I didn't do much. I didn't do anything on that. Next slide. Oh, here and in India, what they do is they crush this. They dry the seed and then they'll crush it and make an aqueous solution of it and to spray onto their crops. Next slide. So I took this work in Dodoma, and I got to Dodoma, and lo and behold, right outside where I was living, large 25-year-old, what looked to be 25-year-old neem trees, loaded with neem fruit. Next slide. These trees, somebody planted these trees all over the streets of Dodoma, not only in the streets of Dodoma. Next slide. The fruits kind of look like olives, but these trees are loaded with the fruit. Next slide. Not only in the city of Dodoma, but out in the rural areas, lining the roads, there are neem trees all over the place. I'd love to know who's responsible for planting those, because they're not. I think whatever knowledge was given 25 years ago on these, I don't see it with any of the farmers. They just, it's Marobaini, which is a local term. But I haven't heard of any use as an agricultural spray, and so I think there's really a lot of potential to look into this, to use neem and look at neem as a possible locally sourced, effective insecticide for things such as tomatoes, because it's completely non-toxic to humans. We use it in Indian medicine. They use it as a medicine. I've taken it actually for different maladies. So it can be eaten by humans. It's a juvenile. It's a growth disruptor in insects, which doesn't. It inhibits the the juveniles, the stages of the insect. And so it's a different mechanism than most of the pesticides that are used. Most pesticides also have some effect on humans. So anyway, that is the third thing, and that's it for my talk. If you have any questions, I think I have a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to introduce Louise Labachon. Yes, Roland.
I just comment and then a question. The comment is that neem all over West Africa is very, very common. And in fact, you hardly ever see a family compound that doesn't have a neem tree in the center for shade. And one of the reasons they're so great is because absolutely nothing affects them. I mean, even termites will not affect the neem tree. So, you know, it's something that people here in Eastern Africa, if people don't have them here,
they have them, but they just are not using them to my knowledge.
Now the question is,
yeah.
You mentioned compost having a synergistic effect with green manures or green manure cover crops.
Yeah.
What is the scientific evidence for that, and how strong is it?
That's a former Rodale manager, Dick Harwood.
Yeah.
I did my postdoc at Rodale Institute, which is where they do research on organic farming, organic crop systems. You know Dick Harwood?
Yes.
Dick Harwood did that research at Michigan, I think it's Michigan State. And you email me and I'll email you. I think I still have the paper, but now in the U.S. here's another issue. We disc in. Most farmers disc in. The Rodale Institute is doing research on no-till, but we still do a lot of disking. But in the temperate countries, as opposed to the tropics, the mulch system in the tropics really, it's much more important. It's critical to go to mulch and no-till on small farms here, I believe. And so this research was done with disking in of cover crops and adding the compost. There was a clear synergistic effect it's actually not the nitrogen in compost that's important. It's the microbes. It's the microbes. When you compost, the microbes increase from the manure and whatever carbon source you put in there. 10,000 times higher density of microbes in compost. And when you apply that to soils, it enhances the decomposition of the cover crop and liberates nutrients, and you get better crop growth. And so you can apply as little as 2 tons per acre, or would that be 4 metric tons per hectare of compost in these large-scale systems, and you get a significant effect. Yes?
Yeah, this is just a comment on the availability of neem. In 1993, I evaluated neem against some stored product pests here in Arusha. And I collected as much material as I wanted from Moshi. You go to the Catholic Church, all the big trees you see around the church are
okay.
You can collect that.
Okay, I want to talk to you afterwards.
Yeah. Also here in Arusha, in Zero Hill, the compound of World Vision offices will have about 10 big trees of neem.
Okay.
Anybody who's interested, you're welcome to collect that.
Okay, great. Yeah, it was the World Vision in Dodoma where we found moringa seed. And that's a whole other story. We're using moringa to clarify water. I think I'm going to introduce Louise Labachon now. Louise, you didn't put that you're Dr. Louise.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, Louise Labachon is program director of the NGO Real Impact in Kenya, based in Thika. Real Impact is involved in Positive Kitchen Gardens, which is involved in nutrition of HIV positive people, and a very important aspect. And they're linking nutrition and agronomy. They build gardens at institutions and homes with minimal pesticide inputs and using organic principles. They have training courses which apply, these application of these nutritional concepts and agronomic concepts. She's also the joint managing director of Real IPM, which is a commercial, that was Real Impact, the NGO, and she's managing director of Real IPM, which is a commercial company producing biopesticides, which I want to know everything about, Louise, please. And producing natural enemies. They work in many African countries. They are exporting to Ethiopia now, and so as well as beginning to export to Tanzania and Uganda. So, Louise.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Don.